Sermon title today, Perspectives on Display against the backdrop of the two passages that we read. I think it was impossible over the past 10 days or so not to be acutely aware of what's happening in Texas and Louisiana, but more so in Texas with a total destruction that occurred with the flooding due to Hurricane Harvey. And I found myself like before with when you are confronted with something that defies description and that seems to be begging for new vocabulary or creating new categories for what you're observing, because this cannot be happening. This is not true. It is as if one's brain just goes into park mode, and you sit like a zombie and you see what's happening, but you don't take it in. Because 52 inches of rain in an area that is prone to flooding, and the result of that is, beyond my understanding, but one sees it happening. Never mind if you're present there and experiencing that. It must be even more so. I think it is something similar to what I experienced after driving through Christchurch in New Zealand shortly after the devastating earthquakes there, where whole city blocks were, turned into rubble. And driving with someone that is familiar with the city, or that used to be familiar with the city, would say, I have to turn here somewhere. But they lost their bearings because the landmarks are no longer there. And I think I experienced something similar with observing how Iraqi and Syrian cities filled with civilians as well was turned into rubble systematically over months and even years. What do we do? What is our response? What do we make of it? One thing that I observed in the process is that when you are confronted with something like that, we often respond from our deepest convictions and the core of our being. And the unfiltered thoughts are put on display. When I came to the US, I was amazed at these politicians who would give an hour-long speech, very well structured, fluently, without any notes, and because I didn't know about a teleprompter. So, geez, these guys are amazing, these Americans. They talk forever, and perfect speech, no hesitation, right pauses, everything. And that's often when we're confronted with a situation like that our true being is put on display, our perspectives. When you don't have the teleprompter, but you're confronted with this reality that defies description and that goes beyond your vocabulary and your created categories so far in your life. And it was interesting to read the perspectives that people put out there, that they put on display. And I will not dwell on the politicians and their jockeying for position and trying to create the right optics in the situation. As God's people and the covenant community, let us look at the theological perspectives that surfaced in the tragedy there. A familiar landmark in Houston and in the televangelist world is that of Joel Osteen, the ever-smiling pastor, the frozen smile that I don't know how he speaks sometimes with his lips so far apart, but he managed to do it. The perspective that when it happened, his first comment was the tweet to say, "Don't worry, God has has this in hand. Don't worry, God's taking care of everything. I don't know what to make of that. What does it mean? But then he proceeded to say, Joel Osteen and the First Lady of Lakewood Church, Victoria, we are praying for everybody involved. And then tragically, the city of Houston didn't ask them to open their church to be a shelter. Later on, they responded, yeah, okay, nobody asked us, and let's open the church. So that was one response, to say, God has got this thing in hand, don't worry. And secondly, we're praying for you. Then there were some other shocking theological comments and perspectives put on display. At least two fervent fundamentalist preachers decided this is a good opportunity to bash the gay community again. One said, this is really good punishment for Houston because of their acceptance of gay people and the normalizing of homosexual behavior. He said, this is God saying, no, we don't like this. Here's a hurricane for you. Here's some flooding for you. And the other one went further, and apart from saying this is the right treatment for Houston, he said, this is a warning for Louisiana and New Orleans. They are having a huge celebration, like a gay pride parade soon in New Orleans. And this is a warning, don't do it, because the hurricane will also hit you. Those are some of the theological perspectives surfacing. Some, what I want to call traditional or common wisdom from the theological field being put on display. In the book of Proverbs, we also find some conventional wisdom. And those are beautiful collections of sayings in the book of Prophets. And I don't want to bash the book of Proverbs. I love the book of Proverbs. But it is conventional wisdom saying, in short, the key to a good life is to obey God. Do good and you'll do well. If you follow the laws, you are assured of a long life, a healthy life, a wealthy life. And that's also some of the wisdom, or the main kernel of wisdom that Joel Osteen gathered from the scriptures, the prosperity theology. If you do certain things right, and you give it a religious flavor, then God will take care of you. You will be rich, and you'll be healthy, and you'll live a long life. We also find in the second passage that we listened to unconventional things happening. And the wisdom that is often contrary to the orthodox or the accepted wisdom of the world. We find the wisdom of Jesus and the practice of Jesus, the ways of Jesus illustrated there. This passage follows Jesus receiving the news that John the Baptist has been beheaded. So he withdrew to a lonely place, but that didn't help him. According to the author of Matthew, the crowds were still flocking to him, following him, not granting him the privilege or the need that he had to be on his own. And what was Jesus' response? What do we read? According to the author of Matthew, he looked on them with compassion and he healed them. He healed the sick. And then follows this miraculous feeding of the 5,000, the men plus their dependents. So let's say each one had 3 dependents, families were bigger that time, but let's work on 3. So that was quite a crowd that were fed with the meager offering of a few fish and loaves of bread. We read about this miraculous feeding, Jesus having compassion on them. What should we make of this? And what should we make of the description of miracles in general? And I'm venturing into difficult territory here. I'm aware of that. And one actually needs a series of sermons to properly deal with it. But let me just say, I think it is appropriate for us, as people associated with the UCC, and I hope following the UCC approach of having respect for freedom of conscience and an understanding of the Scriptures, that we allow each other the freedom to interpret the Scriptures in the way that enables us and make it possible for us to have a meaningful relationship with God. And we will have interpretations of the miracle and the description of it across the spectrum, I think, which is fine. I think some will say we should take it at face value, and Jesus was a miracle worker. He was able to do that, and that's fine. He multiplied the fish and the loaves, able to feed so many people. For myself, that doesn't work. I don't therefore want to say, no, I just want to ignore the description of miracles, because I think it's a valuable part of our Scriptures. For myself, for me, I want to take it more metaphorically and more of a testimony of the people that lived with Jesus and that were associated with Jesus, testifying about what they experienced in His presence and how they viewed Him. And in this case especially, that when the central message of Jesus is practiced, when unconditional acceptance, unconditional love, and the practice of justice, when that is expressed in the world, then there is enough for everybody. Then sustainable living can take place, and then there is abundance so that everybody can be fed and everybody can flourish. Then there is enough in the presence of Jesus, and when the ways and the teachings and the practice of Jesus, when those are followed. What do we read here in the testimony of the author of this gospel? First thing we read is Jesus looked on them with compassion. And then the second milestone that I want to lift out here is when true compassion is present, it is characterized by action that follows. It is fine to say, I'll pray for you, and our thoughts and our prayers are with so and so. And you tweet, we think of you. That's fine. But when true compassion is present, it manifests itself in action. That's what we see what Jesus does again here through His example. He looks on them with compassion, and then the action follows and says, let us heal them. Let us feed them. Let us, through our practice of the kingdom, demonstrate the abundance of God's love and how it finds its expression in the world. So what should we make of it in view of the suffering through natural causes, etc., in the world? Another big theme that demands a series of sermons. But let me just say, I think it is tragic when we take a cheap shot and for personal gain, project an image of God that suits our purposes. And when we weaponize the suffering of other people and try to scare them and say, listen, you gay people, God's going to punish you. Or the city of Houston needs to repent, or God will punish them some more. And have these simple explanations that defies the complexity of reality and that defies the mystery of the wonder of God. I think it is appropriate for us as followers of Jesus and as a covenant community based on God's love and the teachings of Jesus to heed the example that we find in this passage. Whenever disaster strikes, whenever we're confronted with something that is abhorrent and that is difficult to fathom in life, let us be open to God's Spirit so that we are able to look at the world and also at ourselves with compassion. And maybe be so fully open to that Spirit that the action that follows when viewing somebody or something with compassion, that also follows in our lives. And let us also keep the possibility open to view that as part of a window into the mystery of life and the mystery that we call God. And may we especially try to practice what Jesus called the kingdom. Try to live according to those guidelines and not succumb to materialism, to the extremes of competition, to the extreme expressions of greed that we see all around us increasingly, and to extreme individualism as well. But may we embrace the fullness of life and the abundance of life also in human life that can follow, and that will follow if we are able to heed the teachings of Jesus. May we be able to walk with courage in that way. And also be critical of what is presented to us as conventional wisdom. Be open to look at things through the eyes of Jesus and to acknowledge the complexity of reality and the mystery of God, so that our presence in the world may indeed be a healing presence, so that we do not demand understanding everything fully, but that we are willing to give ourselves and of ourselves to say, I heed the call of the one that I call my Savior. I heed the call of the compassionate God and the compassionate man from Galilee that showed us what God is like when God is present in the world. May that be how we respond, so that the abundance of God's love and the flourishing of life may also be what we experience and where we lead others to that place of peace and justice. May that be the perspective that we display from the core of our being as God's people. Amen.